A while back, I asked for suggestions on topics for future videos, which led to one suggestion that I was thrilled to see. Game music is something I've always been fascinated with, and a top 10 list of my favorite game OSTs was a thing I wanted to cover eventually. Well, as they say, there's no time like the present, and that is the thing that we will be talking about today. But as I was trying to nail down my top 10, I started to get curious as to why I was drawn to those choices in particular. What set them apart from the countless other games that I'd played? Why did those teams make the artistic choices that they did? And before I knew it, I'd tripped down a rabbit hole. If you're just interested in the top 10 list, you can just jump to the timestamp on screen, and we'll catch up to you there. For the rest of us, let's dive into the world of game music. The first way that music gets used in video games is probably the most obvious one, though it's also one that's easy to overlook. In the book A Composer's Guide to Game Music by Winifred Phillips, the first use of music she discusses is drawing the audience in right at the start. From the moment you boot up the game, the composer is already hard at work through the main menu music. According to Phillips, there are two purposes that the first music you hear serves, first of which being to set the tone and prep the audience for the experience ahead. Now, I'm sure when I said that, a couple examples from your own experience popped into your head. But for me, the best example I can think of is the Elden Ring main theme. That blast of horns and drums it hits you with genuinely caught me off guard the first time I played the game, and I remember just sitting in awe as it played on. The song immediately sets the tone of this grand operatic adventure, and the rest of the game delivers that in spades. The second purpose that the main menu music serves is more subtle but equally as important, and that is softening that immediate, sometimes overwhelming feeling of complexity you feel when you start a new game. Now, the odds are that if you're watching this video, you don't really feel that very often anymore, but I'd wager that wasn't always the case. And if your personal taste in games includes factory sims or any Paradox game, you know that feeling as well as you do your favorite hoodie. By using music to ease and invite the player into the experience, you'll reduce the chance that they balk at that first hurdle. The second use for music in a game that Phillips identifies is directing player attention. This is why most games you'll play tie musical stings to actions in-game. It provides a way for the developers to draw your attention without needing text prompts or visual signposting, though it's often used in conjunction with those things. The reverse is also true, with the lack of music serving as a subconscious signal to the player that there's nothing left to see. One of my personal favorite examples that employs both ideas liberally is Dead by Daylight. When you play as a killer, the game saves its music for when you're in a chase. The music appears to begin when a survivor is in your line of sight for a few seconds, so even if you haven't quite seen them yourself, the game uses it as a signal that, hey, there's somebody you should be chasing. And of course, when you don't hear that music, then you know that you need to keep searching. In a similar vein, music can also be used to communicate game mechanics. The obvious use of this is in rhythm games, where the music serves as both the soundtrack and the source of the challenge. But it doesn't have to be limited to rhythm games in particular. Billy Bust Up, for example, is a kickstarted platformer made the rounds a few years ago on YouTube, and it was particularly notable for the way that it tied its music into the test boss fight that they released in the demo. In this case, the boss attacks on time to the music, though they do switch between the beat and the melody to keep you on your toes. As of the time of writing, this game hasn't released yet, but given how musical the demo was, I'm excited to see how the rest of the game turns out eventually. Another, more well-known example is Dark Souls 3's Dancer of the Boreal Valley. While it's more subtle here, the dancer also moves and attacks in time with its own boss theme, and fighting it almost feels like you're dancing. It's just a dance where both people are flailing at each other with oversized swords. Even aside from gameplay, music can also help support a game's story and setting. When you think about a game's world building, music can actually add a lot of detail without slowing the pace of the story. For as many problems as I've had in the past with Skyrim as an RPG, the one thing it does better than almost all of its contemporaries is paint a picture of how the common people live in the setting, and the music plays an important role in that. Most of the towns and cities in the game have an inn with a bard, and those bards like to sing, usually unprompted. I'm pretty sure I'll have Ragnar the Red stuck in my head until the day I die, and both versions of the Age of songs convey a lot of information about their respective sides. It's a really clever way of giving the player information about the world around them without ever having to stop them and explain it. Of course, world building is far from the only story element that music can communicate to the audience. There's an interview with Jon Favreau from the lead up to The Lion King 2019 that's lived rent-free in my head ever since I saw it.
No joke, from the moment baby Simba was held up, done. Tears, soggy, and it just didn't stop. Like, I've never been so emotional in my life.
I know.
How'd you do that?
I think, honestly, the secret weapon is the music. Is you could put up crayon drawings and play Hansa's score or those songs, and you'll cry.
It's an incredibly cynical and corporate way of looking at art, but I can't exactly disagree. I don't know what it is about music that can tap directly into the emotional part of the brain, but it's something that games, movies, and TV shows love to use to their advantage. There are dozens of examples I could point to, but in the interest of keeping things as spoiler-free as possible, let's take a look at a moment in Nier Automata that stuck with me since the first time I played the game. Fairly early on, 2B and 9S are ordered to investigate some tracking signals for a number of androids that have gone missing, which leads them to an amusement park full of friendly enemies. The whole scene takes on this strange mix of dread and nostalgia when the music kicks in that I found deeply unsettling my first time through. Dark Souls 3 weaponizes its music much in a similar way when it comes to the final boss. In the switch to the second phase of the fight, the music transitions into a callback to the theme from the final boss in Dark Souls 1. It's a great way to cap off the end of the series by reflecting on just how far the world has come since that first cycle, and it lends a lot of weight to what would otherwise be a fairly unmemorable boss fight. The last major way that music can be used in a game is, admittedly, something that is very outside of my wheelhouse. That's because the last way is by borrowing an idea from opera. Leitmotifs are a musical device that Phillips defines as a musical theme that draws attention to a component of the overall work. In practice, that component is usually a character. You don't see leitmotifs too often in games outside of RPGs, due to the time that it takes to establish the connections in the audience's mind. As an example, there's a piece of music that plays during the original trailer for Final Fantasy XIV's A Realm Reborn.
To all of my children, in whom life flows abundant.
While it doesn't start as a leitmotif, over the course of the game it becomes more and more tied to a particular character, to the point where it becomes their leitmotif. And Final Fantasy XIV loves doing this. Throughout the entire soundtrack there are tons more of them and several other recurring themes sprinkled all over the place. It's far from the only game to do it, though. The Witcher 3 introduces the player very early in the game to a character with a leitmotif in Gaunter O'Dim, though they handle it in a very interesting way. While the character himself doesn't play a prominent role until the Hearts of Stone DLC, you can hear his theme at random points throughout the game. Fun fact, my first and second playthroughs had that first time be in that very first meeting, which really set me on edge. It didn't happen when I was recording the footage for this video, unfortunately. So now that we've spent a decent bit of time digging into the many ways music gets used in games, why is this important? Well, the answer to that is this isn't just applicable to games. Whether you're working on your own game, a video, or even just a D&D game with your friends, how you use your music is going to be the same. So here's the advice that I was able to gather both from A Composer's Guide to Game Music and the many forum posts that pointed me to the book in the first place. First, look at similar projects that you like and see how they use their music. Seeing what worked well and even what didn't can give you a solid foundation to start from. 2. Be aware of what type of music is typical for your genre. Fantasy projects, for example, usually use orchestral music to evoke the epic feeling they usually aim for, but don't be afraid to experiment. Third, you want to avoid overly repetitive music for what I hope are obvious reasons. And last, just like any other skill, you're not going to get it completely right on the first or maybe even the 10th try. So don't be afraid to make mistakes with the music that you pick. And when you do, figure out what went wrong and do something different next time. If you're interested in writing music for games, I'd highly recommend actually taking a look at The Composer's Guide to Game Music yourself. There were only a couple chapters that covered what we talked about in this video, but the book takes a really thorough dive into the skills needed to break into the industry. And that brings us to the end of the rabbit hole section. I promised you a list of my top 10 game OSTs, and it's time to make good on that. To set some ground rules, this is a completely subjective list based purely on my own tastes and experiences, and I limited it to one entry per franchise to keep Final Fantasy from taking up too much space. Alright, let's roll. Number 10. Mick Gordon decided that the perfect pairing for a game about a man too angry to die fighting his way through the forces of hell was a soundtrack composed almost entirely of metal, and boy was he right. This soundtrack pumps you up for every encounter better than almost anything else I've heard. My one complaint is that the rest of the game is so much fun that the music tends to blend into the moment while I'm playing, and while I have no real emotional connections to the songs, they're going to be in every gym playlist I make for the rest of time. Number 9. Heroes of Might and Magic 5 is not on this list because it has outstanding music. In fact, I don't even know if it has the best music in its own franchise. What earns it its place on this list is that it was the game that first got me paying attention to the musics in the games that I played. The game's main theme is a variation on the Dies Irae chant, and every faction's town music is a fittingly thematic twist on that one theme. Noticing that blew my mind as a kid, and it'll always have a special place in my heart because of it. Number 8. Lobotomy Corp is my perennial entry for my favorite game that I am terrible at. In fact, I usually say that I love everything about the game except for playing it. It features incredible lore and art, with a thought-provoking story that manages the rare feat of drawing influence from Jewish tradition for more than just the aesthetic. And the music is so good, it manages to make you forget you're running a facility full of the worst nightmare fuel humanity has to offer. And Punishing Bird, who did nothing wrong. Number 7. Unlike Heroes of Might and Magic 5, Vampire Survivors is here purely because the music is just that good. What started as a genre-creating love letter to Castlevania has turned into a franchise-crossing juggernaut, and nearly every song in the soundtrack is this incredible earworm that will not leave your head once it gets stuck there. Seriously, even if you've never played the game, if you're a fan of the old 16-bit classics, you owe it to yourself to give some of these songs a listen. Number 6. Wandersong is my pick for the most unfairly overlooked indie darling. Or at least I think it is. I haven't been able to find any kind of sales figures for the game, but it never seemed to get the buzz it definitely deserves. Regardless, the game is a musical adventure to save the world that ranges from fun and silly to heart-wrenching depending on the situation, and the music is baked so deeply into the gameplay there really isn't a division between the two. If you enjoyed Undertale and you want something else kind of in that vein, this one's for you. Number 5. If you're not familiar with Nier Automata, I have no idea how to describe this one to you. Yoko Taro is a writer and director who refuses to be tied down by genre convention, theme consistency, or common sense, and yet I was hooked every minute I spent in this game. Even with having the ending and 2 of the big plot twists spoiled for me years ahead of time, every emotional beat hit exactly when and how it was supposed to, and I'm going to chalk a lot of that up to just how well the game uses its music. However much Square Enix pays its composers, clearly it is not enough. Number 4. My first Monster Hunter game, and still my favorite. The area themes all perfectly capture the feelings of the biome that they represent, and the monster themes themselves really emphasize the scale and power of the things that are constantly trying to ruin your day. Even still, all this time after playing it, the Basil Goose theme drives fear into my heart. And I've definitely used the Sapphire Star theme on more than one occasion when I was editing videos. Number 3. The music in The Witcher 3 is my favorite kind of art, the kind that feels like you're immersing yourself in another culture. Its heavy inspiration taken from Polish folk music sets it apart from so many of the other fantasy games I've played, and even aside from that, it's just got great music. It's also music that I have some real connection with outside of the games. Steel for Humans and Song of the Sword Dancer have featured prominently in more than one D&D game I've run, and during my brief stint in grad school, The Fields of Ard Skellig was my go-to focus music when I had to write an essay. Even now, it's one I'll put on from time to time when I just want to relax. Number 2. You had to know this one was going to be on here somewhere. Undertale is famous for just how good its music is, and you'll hear no argument from me. From tearjerkers like Home to the sheer joy of Save the World and the perennial meme of the internet Megalovania, Every song on the soundtrack is outstanding, both on its own and as a part of the game. Even some of the less popular songs like Spider Dance or Dummy are great. For as overexposed as the soundtrack got after the game's release, there's a reason for that, and I'd be amazed if anything ever knocks it from my number 2 spot. Before we get to my number 1 pick, I do want to call out some honorable mentions that didn't quite make the list for one reason or another. Payday 2. Great music, I will give you my all as a classic, really need to play more of it one of these days. Halo 3. Just narrowly missed the cut, could be number 10 on a different day. Scarlet Nexus. Love the soundtrack, but it's been a while since I've played it. I'll have more to say about this one somewhere down the line. Dark Tide. Rough launch, seriously underrated at this point. Outstanding music, but it kinda loses something when you listen to it outside the game. It's definitely not an exhaustive list. There are so many games that could have been here that just didn't make the cut, and I'm sure there are also plenty of others that would be here if I'd ever played them. But for me, there's only one game that could be number 1. And if you've been around for a while, you already know what it is. And finally, number 1. Final Fantasy XIV started as something fun to do with my friends during lockdown, and it quickly became one of my favorite games of all time. I already know I'm going to have a lot to say on this one in a future video, so I'll keep this strictly to the music. Without exaggeration or hyperbole, this game uses its music the best out of any game I have ever played. And if you're someone who's interested in composing for video games, the piles of things that it gets right, and the few genuine missteps, provide the kind of example you almost never get to see. It's the kind of thing that I'm at risk of gushing about every time I get on the topic, and I'll consider myself incredibly lucky if we ever get a soundtrack that manages to top it. But that's just my list, and I'd love to hear about yours. The wonderful thing about art is that everyone brings a unique perspective to the table, and like I said before, I'm sure there are games that I missed. Leave your thoughts down in the comments, and be sure to tune in next month, when I finally talk about a game I haven't touched in over a decade. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.